Hey everyone, Sam here, otherwise known as FPL Pricey, and in today's video I'm going to run you through all of the key transfer tips ahead of Game Week 7 in FPL after what was a pretty tumultuous Game Week 6 this week. In the meantime, if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel, that would be greatly appreciated. For now though, let's crack on with it. Right then, so of course we have to start off talking about one player in particular this game week, and that is Cole Palmer. Now, over the last season and a little bit, we've seen that Cole Palmer can be an incredibly explosive FPL asset, and this week was a reminder of just what sort of damage he can do, especially if you don't have him in your side like myself. Now, 4 goals, no assists, but 4 goals was absolutely incredible. 25-pointer, especially well done if you're out there with him in your team or if you've captained him. Very, very well done, and do feel free to boast and brag in the comments below. But what a game week it was from him. 1.99 XG from that match alone was absolutely incredible, especially for a midfielder. So, of course, there's going to be a big hurry to try and bring him into our sides ahead of Game Week 7. However, I think it is highly dependent on your structure. I'll go into that in just a moment's time. But first of all, let's take a look at the data and let's take a look at the fixtures to come. Now, the reason that I probably wouldn't be saying that you absolutely have to rip up your teams and make sure you have him in your side immediately is because of the next 5 fixtures in particular. Now, Nottingham Forest, on paper, it's a green fixture. It's a good fixture. But Forest themselves have been pretty decent defensively for the last season and a half now. The data is good. And I think the Brighton game, whilst they are themselves a good team, they did leave themselves very, very open at the back. They played a very high line, obviously conceded the penalty, which is a high XG chance in itself. And the free kick that Cole Palmer scored as well, whilst, you know, it is obviously very much down to the quality of the player, 9 times out of 10 that doesn't go in. So there is a bit of noise that we have to attribute to the Brighton game, and I don't think we're going to see that sort of open brand of football being played against Chelsea in the next 4 or 5 game weeks. Now, Forest, not a bad fixture, but it is the best one in the next 5 objectively. Liverpool, Newcastle, then Man United. Of course, we've seen them being pretty open today against Spurs, but they were a man down for the majority of it. And then Arsenal as well. It's not a run of fixtures where I wouldn't expect Cole Palmer to do anything in, and obviously Fantasy Football Hub does agree with that, 34.4 expected points from the next 5 game weeks. That's obviously very, very good. That's almost 7 points a week on average, and nobody is saying that he's not going to be a good pick, even with those fixtures. It's just whether or not you need to rip apart your teams and sell other premium assets, even for a hit, to make sure that he is in your side. And quite simply, I just don't think you absolutely need to do that right now. I am very, very scared of him. I don't have him, and I don't think at the moment I will have him next week. There is a double move that I could make that I'll explain later on that might get me Cole Palmer without a hit. But as it stands right now, I do think that I'm trying to be a bit more patient this year. And I think that 4 goals, whilst it is likely to obviously raise a lot of eyebrows and make you want him straight away, that won't happen every single week. So I think a little bit of balance is required here. And eventually he will do it again. He will haul again. But whether or not that comes in the next 4 or 5 game weeks, with the fixtures to come, I think it's less likely that he hauls than some of the other premium assets around his price point. So for me right now, I think I'm probably not bringing him in this week, but I completely understand if you feel very strongly the other way. He is one of, if not the most explosive player in the game right now. And despite the fixtures, you can still see him returning in any given one of them right now, given the quality of the player and the amount of chances that Chelsea are creating for him. So by all means, I'm not saying he's a bad pick. That would be insane if I did. But I also want to add a little bit of balance and say that perhaps you don't need to rip apart your teams immediately to bring him in if you're well set for game week 7. So to further add on to the Cole Palmer discussion, I wanted to talk about Saka, who would be probably one of the players arguably on the chopping block if you were to look to bring in Cole Palmer this week, if you didn't have him already, of course. Now, Bukayo Saka, I went to watch the Arsenal game live at the Emirates on Saturday, and I have to say, on the pitch, what a player. Absolutely incredible. 7 shots, 6 chances created, decent underlying data as well, over 1 XGI created in the match, and a man of the match performance without any sort of attacking returns as well. extremely unlucky not to get anything. There was one chance in particular in the first half that he laid up on a plate for Martinelli that Martinelli unfortunately leant back on a little bit and it went over the bar. But Bukayo Saka as a player is perhaps not quite returning the amount of points that we might expect from him so far. But looking at the eye test, looking at him on the pitch, I think it's very, very close to happening. And with the next 2 games in mind, Southampton in particular look very, very open. They play from the back, obviously. Leicester tried to do that a couple of times and got caught out against Arsenal. Southampton will get the same treatment, I would imagine. And I do think it's only a matter of time before we see Bukayo Saka return, not necessarily 4 goals like Cole Palmer did, but pretty strongly as well. And I think the next 2 fixtures in particular, it's just not necessarily worth selling an Arsenal asset, an attacking asset with good underlying data, especially if he's on penalties and getting 90 minutes week in, week out and playing well, for another very good player. I just don't know if it's quite the right time to do so. Again, you might disagree with me. And like I mentioned, there is a world in which I do a little bit of a mix-up in midfield with 2 transfers out, 2 transfers in for free this week that would involve selling Saka and gaining Cole Palmer, but I would also be gaining another Arsenal asset in the meantime as well, which I will go on to discuss right now. So the one route that I do have at the moment to bring in Cole Palmer would be to get rid of Saka, but to also get in Leandro Trossard. Now, the reason that this is even an option, and whilst it's probably on the very, very outskirts of my mind right now, it is tempting because Trossard's data when he's on the pitch is really good. 0.43 XG per 90 is actually better than Saka's so far this season. The problem with Trossard has always been whether or not we can rely on him to start week in, week out. However, he's played well, obviously did play very well against Leicester, got a goal assist. It was a goal and an own goal really, but you take those. And of course would be very, very likely to keep his place against Southampton in game week 7. Another good game week where Trossard presses from the front. He almost played that dual 9 role or false 9 role with Havertz in game week 6, and I expect that to happen again in game week 7. If that is the case, I think he's a really, really good differential pickup for game week 7 and beyond. The only problem with Arsenal assets now is if you buy them this week, you are probably a little bit worried about game week 9 to 11, where they go up against Liverpool, Newcastle and Chelsea. I would argue that 2 of those 3 games, Newcastle and Chelsea, I'm not that scared about owning attacking assets in. It's more defensively that I would be a little bit more worried. But the next 2, Southampton and Bournemouth, are very, very good attacking fixtures, and I think they're there for the taking. Trossard at 6.9 million, especially if you've gone off the likes of Eze or Diaz, who I'll come on to in just a moment's time, could be a really good differential that, whilst Ødegaard is out, his place in the starting 11 is maybe less at risk than it was before. There's another extra slot that he can play in, and he looks really good in that position as well. The only problem with Trossard at the moment for me is that I'm just a little bit hesitant because Gabriel Jesus is back and fit. And of course, Raheem Sterling is on the bench at the moment as well. I think Sterling is more likely to come on for Martinelli around the 70th minute mark and maybe competing for minutes with him. Whereas Gabriel Jesus might be more directly competing with Havertz. And that means Havertz might drop in every now and then. And that is basically Trossard's place. So I think that's a long-winded way of saying that Trossard isn't nailed into the side, but the way that Arsenal are playing at the moment, the way that Trossard is playing at the moment, I would be surprised not to see him start in game week 7 and 8. And honestly, those are the 2 money fixtures. Those are the 2 weeks that I really care about. And if it means that I could afford Cole Palmer, it's perhaps a differential route into the Arsenal attack. That may not mean that I'm necessarily sacrificing the Arsenal attack altogether by getting rid of Saka. It kind of gives me another ticket in that raffle if I really wanted it. But let me know what you think of Trossard as a differential punt. But for what it's worth, I think he's being massively underrated at the moment because we're not used to seeing him start games. Whereas at the moment, I think he looks a lot more locked in than we perhaps had him down for at the start of the season. So Luis Diaz is a player that I brought in game week 6 on my wildcard, and I think a lot of other managers, whether or not you were on a wildcard in game week 6 or in the last couple of weeks, have brought him in as well. Now, obviously, a frustrating start to life with Luis Diaz as an owner in game week 6 in particular against Wolves, didn't really cook up much at all, and obviously brought off at 70-ish minutes. Now, the 70 minutes thing is something that I was willing to take a bit of a risk on, because despite having only 65, 70 minutes on the pitch per match, so far this season, the data's still been good, and he's still been getting the attacking returns. However, it only takes a couple of weeks of no returns for those sort of minutes per match to become a real worry for me. And I'm already experiencing doubts over Luis Diaz, which maybe puts into question my decision-making in Game Week 6 on the wild card. I was hesitant to bringing him in the first place, but maybe caved into pressure in the community a little bit. And I'm a little bit annoyed at myself for it. Although I think I need to weigh up the decision based on merit right now, and the data is still good. He's still getting 70 minutes a match, and Crystal Palace and Chelsea, whilst not easy fixtures in total, are still giving up quite a few key chances at the moment, and both of them I see Liverpool scoring a couple of goals at least in. So it's whether or not really I think Luis Diaz is in line to start both of those matches, and if he is, I think I'd probably hold on for the next 2 weeks at least. For what it's worth, I think he is likely to start, but I am a little bit worried now that if he starts midweek in the Champions League in any given week, this week obviously is the one that I'm thinking of first up, it makes it ever so less likely that he would start the weekend, considering the amount of depth that is on the bench. Gakpo's a quality player. Darwin can come in as well. I am a little bit worried there. So it's one that I'm monitoring, although I think to sell him after just one game week of underperformance would be a little bit too quick. And Crystal Palace away is not a fixture that I was worried about when I bought him in the first place on a wild card. So for me, I do have doubts. I'm a little bit worried about the minutes, but unless you've got loads of free transfers in the bank and you've got a very obvious replacement that you already love, I think he can be held for the next couple of game weeks at the moment. Like I said, though, there's a double switch that I could do to bring in Palmer and Trossard to get rid of Diaz and Saka. For me, that seems at the moment like I'd be forcing the issue a little bit too much, and maybe it's a bit reactionary, so I'm more likely to roll. But if I was to take a bit of an upside leap of faith, then I could make that double switch, and who knows, it could of course pay off. Another player that I think we need to talk about in transfer tips this week is Dwight McNeil, who of course got his brace for Everton in game week 6. Now, looking at the data straight away, I think it's pretty clear to see that we're not expecting braces from him week in, week out with a 0.08 XG per 90. In fact, even one of the 2 chances he scored at the weekend was a very low XG chance. And okay, there are 2 ways that you can look at this. One, they're not creating big chances for Dwight McNeil, but the other way is that he's obviously in good form at the moment and he's finishing very low XG chances and outperforming the underlying data there. So perhaps if he's onto a bit of a flyer at the moment, you could back that he continues that over what is a very good run of fixtures over the extended patch beyond the next 5. So the next 5 look good. Newcastle at home is probably the toughest of the next 5, but followed by 2 promoted sides in there and Fulham at home as well. It's a good run of 5 fixtures at the very, very least. At 5.5 million as well, he fits into that budget enabler point of view, and you're looking at your Semenyos, your Smith Rowes, maybe even the likes of Minte might be hanging around in your team at the moment as well. This player is definitely in the mix and in the conversation to beat any of them right now. And I think for me, it's the underlying assist data, the XA per 90, that looks particularly encouraging. 0.48 XA per 90 is very, very good for any midfielder, but especially at 5.5 million, it really goes to show that Dwight McNeil is the heartbeat of the Everton midfield at the moment, and pretty much anything they do creatively is feeding through him. So if Everton are scoring a goal, it's very, very likely that in some shape or form, he will be involved. It's just how many goals you back Everton to score over the next few game weeks. And personally, looking at the fixtures, I think they'll do pretty well. I think they've been underperforming slightly and been slightly unlucky in a few games up until this point. And I think maybe they're about to turn a corner a little bit. So Dwight McNeil, although there's very little goal threat, he'll pop up with the odd thunder strike like we saw in game week 6. And then we're expecting a lot more creatively from him than we would for a lot of other 5.5 million midfielders. So I do like him as a differential option. Good fixtures to come. I probably wouldn't be ripping apart my side just to squeeze him in. But if you're looking for a budget enabler at the moment, look no further than Dwight McNeil. Another cheap, really differential option I like in midfield is Brennan Johnson. Now, of course, it's very easy to say that after what would probably be a man of a match performance against Man United with a goal and assist. But it was so much more than that as well. He also hit the post in the first half as well, did really well down that right-hand flank too, was a threat throughout the game, and he has now scored in his last 4 games in all competitions. So he's really starting to prove any doubters wrong. And perhaps I did overlook him a little bit at the start of the season as well, based on the fact that I didn't really think that he could perform at this level and reliably and consistently match his XG data, which in the past he's underperformed pretty drastically for quite a long time. However, the XG data so far this season is looking really, really strong, 0.51 XG per 90, and we're starting to see that it really translates to real-time goals and assists as well. So 2 goals, 2 assists in the league so far, obviously 4 in a row in all competitions. And also, the next 5 fixtures look really, really decent. Brighton, we've just seen what happened against Chelsea when they play the high line. They'll do the same against Spurs, and Spurs have a lot of pace in behind, Brennan Johnson being one of those. And I do think they'll capitalise on that defensive frailty that Brighton seem to have at the moment, followed by West Ham, who have been one of the poorest teams in the league defensively in the first 6 game weeks as well. Crystal Palace, Aston Villa and Ipswich, nothing to really be scared of there either. I really like the look of him as a differential option at the moment. Now, obviously, Spurs have options across their front line, so I would never go as far as to say that he's completely 100% locked in, but the way he's playing at the moment, it's his place to lose. So Brighton next, I think, is an absolute lock for him to be starting that match, barring any sort of freak injury. And again, if he performs well in that, the West Ham game's his as well. So I really like him as an option. I think that if you hop on him early, we're about to see some price rises from him. And at 0.7% ownership, you'll get all of the effective points from him as well, whilst everyone else plays catch up. So I do really like him as a differential option. It's just whether or not there's a space in your midfield that you're willing to use an extra Spurs slot on at the moment. So one final player I want to discuss a little bit today is Liam Delap, who of course led the line really well against Aston Villa, got rewarded with 2 goals and of course a man of the match performance too. So I think if we talk about Ipswich more generally for a second before Delap specifically, Ipswich struggled at the start of the season but had a really rough couple of game weeks to start off. And since then, week on week, look more and more capable of matching up to anyone in the Premier League. And I think they're coached incredibly well by Kieran McKenna. Every week they seem to be improving just little things here and there, and Delap absolutely fits into their strongest 11 and what they're trying to do against the tougher opponents. He leads the line really well. Of course, we all know he's a bit of a unit, but he's also pretty quick. He's also pretty athletic. And when the ball drops to him in and around the box, he's more than capable and mobile enough to get it out of his feet, take a turn, or to lay it off, of course, as well, but to take a turn and get a shot off more often than not. And I think he's one of the more clinical finishers I've seen at this price point in quite a long time. Now, looking at Delap more specifically, at 5.5 million, you're looking at a third striker slot. You're not looking at a first or second. Obviously, no one's going to be switching out Haaland for Delap. But if you're looking at this price point, you're looking at your DCLs, your Chris Woods, your João Pedros, and now Liam Delap falls into that category as well. And because he's a little bit cheaper than any of them, if you're struggling budget-wise, I really don't hate having Delap ahead of some of those options if you're looking for that cheap third striker that maybe some weeks you play him, maybe some weeks when they don't have a good fixture, you can bench him if you've got a 5th midfielder that you like the look of, maybe a Morgan Rogers, for instance, or, of course, a Dwight McNeil, who we've already mentioned today. But looking at the next 4 game weeks, I think you can play him in any one of those as well. You're expecting him to do pretty well against West Ham, Everton, Brentford, Leicester, who all give up chances, who all struggle against the big, brutish centre-forward that Delap is obviously going to be. And honestly, I think he's a young forward. He's going to continue getting better week on week. He's learning the system. And Ipswich generally, I think, are really growing into the Premier League at the moment, and they're only going to get better. And with the fixtures to come, I think Delap is going to get more chances than we've seen him get so far. And I think that data, that XG number, track it over the next couple of game weeks, because I reckon it's up at least to 0.3, in 4 or 5 game weeks time, and maybe even beyond that as well. So I do really like the look of him as an option, and maybe one player that is running a little bit hot at the moment, and you can get on him early before the masses start to clock onto the fact that he actually might be a pretty decent Premier League operator. As we reach the end of today's video, I'd absolutely love it if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It would go a long way and really help support the channel as I continue to try and grow it throughout the season. And of course, if there are any players at all that I haven't spoken about today that you'd like me to talk about in the comments, do feel free to just leave a note in the comments below, and I'll try and get back to you as quickly as possible. In the meantime though, look forward to seeing you again later on this week as we start preparing my side and yours for game week 7 in FPL on Thursday.